Good evening, everybody.
Kavod Harav, how are you?
Baruch Hashem, thank you. Um, it looks like we're on bet. So it says here the Bet Yosef, Katav Mordechai beperek Amevi Kadeyain. Says the Mordechai in this perek, Veshem Avi Azri, name of this rabbi. Shiput shetolin bo ofot, right? So if you have a skewer and you're roasting chickens there on that, v'haya aroch yoter midai, and it was too long, ve'asar Rabbi lachtoch oto velos lasarfo, right? So he says, right, that the rabbi, my rabbi, he forbade to cut that skewer down to size, and also not to burn it. Mishum tikun kli. Why? Because you're like fixing a utensil. You're making a utensil. Velo dame lechotcha be'ur. So it says it doesn't resemble, when you cut it with the fire, befish nerot, with two candles. Right, there's like a certain case in the Talmud that talks about this. Lamed bet amud bet tehatam nireh kemadlik shte nerot. So it says there, it's a different issue. It looks like you're lighting two candles. Okay. Hmm, interesting. So that's one piece there. Now we have another piece about a knife. And this one is long. Oh. Yeah, it goes down to almost the whole chapter. Okay, so let's see what it says. Hmm. So it talks about this, right? סכין שנפגמה ביום טוב מותר לחדדה במשחזת של עץ. That it says the knife that was chipped on Yom Tov. So it's allowed to sharpen it with a sharpener, made out of wood. So you're allowed to sharpen it, but with a wooden one, which is probably the abnormal way, not the best way to do it. Okay, so let's see the tour inside. Probably better. We can get a better idea what's going on. Yeah. So it says the tour like this, right? As we said, the knife got chipped, whatever, right? Whatever they call that. And ביום טוב מותר לחדדה במשחזת של עץ. So it says you're allowed to, right, as we said, to sharpen it O al chaberta, right? Or the other way to do it is to sharpen it with another knife, right? Like, you see those people, right? They do that. They sharpen one knife with the other. Umorin לעשות כן, אבל, he says, we can even tell people to do that, no problem. אבל במשחזת של אבן, but if you're using a stone sharpener, right? So then it's not allowed. אף על פי שמותר לחדד בה, אין מורין לעשות כן. So even though you're allowed to use it, he says, but we don't tell people to do that. אבל להעביר שמנוניתו, אף בשל אבן מורין לעשות כן. But he says, regarding removing the fat which is on the knife, so there we can even tell people to do it with stone. Okay. ואם נפגמה מערב יום טוב, אסור. But if this happened, right, if it was chipped before Yom Tov, then it's forbidden. והרמב"ם כתב, אפילו על גבי עץ הלכה, בין מורים כן. So the Rambam says, even if it's wood, it is a halacha, but we don't tell people to do it. So he's more stringent a little bit. ועל גבי משחזת של אבן, if you want to use a stone one, אין משחיזין כלל. We don't do it at all, he says. ואדוני אבי אורסל, the Rosh, he says, כתב כסבר ראשונה, he writes like the first opinion, which is more lenient. נפגמה מערב יום טוב, if it got chipped before יום טוב, אסור לחדדה במשחזת. You're not allowed to sharpen it with a sharpener. ואם לא נפגמה מערב יום טוב, אלא עמדה, but if it didn't get chipped before יום טוב, rather it just עמדה, פירוש התחילה קצת להתקלקל. Rather, what happened was that it started to, get messed up a little bit, get damaged on before Yom Tov. ואינן חותכה יפה. So therefore, right, it's not cutting well. אם יכול לחתוך בה על ידי הדחק, so he says, if you can still use it, with a little bit of a difficulty, יכול להשחיזה, you can sharpen it ביום טוב, יום טוב. Okay. All right. Okay, let's see Bit Yosef. We got a lot of things going on here. Okay. Yeah. I'm just asking a question, right to call it. Do you think you guys think that it's worthwhile to do this halacha, or it's not so practical?
Kavod Harav, can we just learn it anyways?
Yeah, we can. Yeah, I'm just, I'm asking you guys if you're interested.
That's a yes.
Okay. All right. I have no problem. No problem. Okay. I just thought maybe, whatever, it's boring to you, whatever. Okay.
Kavod Harav, your volume.
Again, it's down?
A little bit, no?
What is it with this? I can't understand. Why does this happen all the time? So strange. I don't know why this happens. Yeah, it's down again. Looks like I have to do something here to fix this problem. Don't know why it does that. It's very interesting. Okay. Anyway. So let's get back to our discussion. As we said, right, that We're gonna do the Bet Yosef. So it says Bet Yosef regarding the knife issue. Perek and Sadin, right? Where is this in this Perek in Gemara there? And Sadin. It says over there, Tanan, in the Mishnah, En mashchizin et hasakin, aval mesi'ah gabe chaverta. So he says, again, right, you're not allowed to sharpen the knife, but what you can do is, as we said, right, sharpen one against the other, one knife against the other, right? Gemara, right, it says in the Gemara there, Amar Rav Huna, lo shanu ela mashchezet shel even. So it says, right, we're only talking about a stone one, right, which is the prohibition there. About mashchezet shel etz, but if it's wood, mutar, right, it's allowed to do. So then he says, right, V'ika kama lishne beGemara. So he says there are several languages there, right, in the Talmud. In other words, different versions of this halakha. Right, Dibre Rav Huna uveperusha dematnitin. And so yeah, there's different ways of the variations of how they learn this out. Different degrees, right, of severity, whatever. Ve'arif Tetvav Amud Aleph says the Rif lo katav shum lashon mehen. Interesting, right? So he says that the Rif didn't write any of these, versions. He also did not bring the words of Rav Huna. Okay, so right, the question is, why did the Rif omit this halakha? Okay, that's one question. Let's go on. So he says, "Be'ita tu beGemara." It says also in the Gemara there, "Man tana de ashchaza atzma asur." Who is the right Tana who teaches that sharpening a knife is forbidden? Amrav Chazda de lo Rabbi Yehuda. It's not like Rabbi Yehuda. It says the Tanya Rabbi Yehuda Omer Matir, because it says in Braita that Rabbi Yehuda allows this. Right? What does that mean? He allows preparations for consumption, preliminary, right? Oh, pasak Rav Chazda elachak Rabbi Yehuda. So Rav Chazda paskins like Rabbi Yehuda. Amar Nehemiah hava kaimna kamed de Rabba. So this rabbi says, I was standing in front of Rabbi. So he says, right, that he was sharpening the knife, using like a palm tree, right, whatever, something like that. And they told him, so they asked him, right, the people over there who are watching this, they said, are you doing this to sharpen it, or are you doing it to remove the fat? So he answers, right, no, I'm doing this to remove the fat. But it says that I saw that according to his thinking, he was doing to sharpen. Right. So in other words, he says something like this. Right? I read his mind. He told us that he's doing it to take off the fat, but the truth is he was doing it to sharpen it. Right? I could see. I figured it out. Right? Something like that. Right? So then, why did he tell me the truth? Right? But the rabbi is a liar. What's going on there? Right? So this is one of the things, that it's halakha, but we don't tell people. It's a secret halakha, right? We keep it a secret. Right? That's why he didn't tell the people that it's allowed to do that. Okay, we talked about this already last week, right? We spoke about that. Why sometimes we, even though something is halakha, we don't teach it in public, right, or whatever, or we don't teach it to people. Okay, we talked about that. So then he goes on. Amar Abaye hava kaimna kamedemo v'hava ka me'aver sakina afuma derechaya. So he says, right, I was standing in front of this rabbi. Abayam says, and he was, right, rubbing the knife on the mill, right? So they asked him the same question, right? Are you doing this to sharpen it, or are you doing it to remove the fat? So the same thing, right? He says, he told me that he's doing it to remove the fat. Then I really saw, right, that he was really doing it to sharpen it. So same concept, right? So why is that again, right? Same thing. That it's not, it's halakha. We don't teach this halakha to people, right? Whatever, right? Katav Arif calls so the Rif writes all this. Oh, so the Rif didn't write omit everything. He just omitted certain parts, right? Whatever, but not the whole thing. So there is something here that the Rif does write. Okay, whatever. So good. Let's go on. So he goes on. פירש רש"י, הלכה כרבי יהודה ומותר כל איש לעשות אבל אין מורים לרבים. כן. Right, so Rashi explains like this, right? Halacha zek Rabbi Yehuda. So what does that mean? Everybody's allowed to do this. Whoever wants to do it, no problem, right? But we don't, right? We don't give this heter in public, right? In public, we don't give it. Only in a private setting, right? One-on-one, something like that, right? We can do that, but publicly we don't do that. שלא יזלזלו אף בשאפשר לעשותו מבעוד יום. Why is that? What's the reason why? That we don't teach this in public. So it says because we don't want them to go too far, right? And be lenient, even if it was possible to do this before the holiday. So he says, right, that we only allow in a case where it broke on Yom Tov, or right, right, yesterday he was busy, he wasn't able to do it, and then we allow him to do it. But if he wasn't busy and he just neglected it, right? So then we don't allow. So it's one of those things where you have to like be mindful of yourself, and kind of like to be your own right supervisor. You gotta supervise yourself here, because you have to know, right? You have to be honest with yourself in your conscience, right? And say the truth, right, in your mind. Were you able to do this yesterday or not? That's the question, right? Before you don't, before you gauge this kind of question, you're not really allowed to just do it. That's the reason why we don't teach it in public. Okay, good. Interesting. So then he goes on, אבל אין מורים כרבים כן שלא יזלזלו במסעד השרת וביום דחו הנה דשרת כגון שנתקלקלו ביום רב. Yeah. או שהיה תמול דרות, כדאמין כמה, as we gonna say. דלא התיר רבי יהודה אלא במכשירים שאפשר לעשותן מערב יום טוב. Because Rabbi Yehuda only allows to do preliminary labors where it wasn't possible to do this right before the holiday. Otherwise, no. That's the thing, right? Veitatu begemara. So, right, it says furthermore in the Talmud. אמר רבי יוסף, סכין שעמדה מותר לחדדה ביום טוב, והוא דפסקה אגב דוחקה. So this rabbi says something similar to this halacha, Rabbi Yosef, right? He says that if a knife, right, becomes dulled, whatever, right? So you're allowed to sharpen it. And he says that's only if it happened because of pressure. So we'll see what that means, right? I'm not really sure what he means by that. כתב ריף על זה דווקא אגב רחיה או אגב דיקולה. So it says the Rif regarding this halacha. He says, what are we talking about? Doing it on a mill, right? Or doing it on, as we said, right, the palm tree. But you're not allowed to do it with a sharpener, right? A knife sharpener, right? There's a name for that, right? That tool that they use, whatever they call that. Right? So they don't use that. You're not allowed to do. Why? Because that's the normal way. So we only allow you to do it the abnormal way, right? That's the thing. לא, וכתב הראש, מה שפסק הריף, אבל במשחזת לא היינו שאין להורות כן. So it says the Rosh, right, that which the Rif said, that we don't allow to do with a mill, with a sharpener, that means we shouldn't tell people to do that. Right? אבל הלכה כרבי יהודה, but the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda. So what does that mean? You really are allowed to do it with a sharpener. Dafa mashchezet shel even mutar. So what does that mean? Even a stone sharpener, right, which is the normal way, you're allowed to do this really. דהמתניתין דאין משחיזין את הסכין דאוקמה רב הונא במשחזת של אבן כמה רב חסדא דלא כרב יהודה והריף לא הביא כל הנה דישנה דייתא בגמרא משום דקיימא המתניתין דאין משחיזין את הסכין דלאו הלכתה היא דקיימא לן כרב יהודה ומה okay so what he's saying is like this right that basically the Rif holds over here that we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda. So what does that mean? You are allowed to do these kinds of things, preliminary labors, but we don't tell people, right? That. So that's why he didn't. So that's what he meant to say that it's not allowed. Okay, interesting. Tekaimalan Rabbi Yehuda uma shevi arif uvda. So it says that which the Rif brings, right? That the story that the that he's passing the right rubbing the knife on the palm tree whatever. He brought this for the purpose of telling us halacha zak Rabbi Yehuda, but he didn't bring this right to teach us that we don't teach people this. Because it doesn't make sense to say that we can't even tell people to do it with a wooden sharpener. Okay. Interesting. So it says because even the rabbis allow you to use a wooden one. אפילו לחדדה, לחד dishna, even to sharpen it, all right, not just to remove the fat, right? Whatever. So it's according to that language, one language. So it says since it's only rabbinical, this prohibition, we go lenient. Right? So it says therefore, right, when it comes to the wooden one, we even allow you to sharpen it. Right? We tell you it's allowed. The Messina that you're allowed to do it right one knife on the other. Even to sharpen it, but if you're going to use a stone, right, sharpener, to remove the fat, mutar, that's allowed, to remove the fat, which is more lenient. But it says, right, if you want to sharpen it with a stone sharpener, that we don't tell people to do, right? Even though it's allowed. Okay. All right. So let's go on. So he says, so who was this, right? Who was the one who said this? Just want to make sure I got my sources right here. This was the Rosh. Yeah, the Rosh. Okay. Good. So let's go on. Abal Haran Piresh Divrei Arif, right? So it says, but the Ran explains the Rif Kipshatan, according to the simple meaning. The Rosh, in other words, right, embellished a little bit the meaning of the Rif, right, whatever. But the Ran goes according to the simple meaning. Lomar Shevi Ali Uvda de Rava. So what does that mean? That he brought the story of Rava, the Kam Me'avar Sakina Vuma de Dikula, that he's passing over, right, the knife on the palm tree, right, rubbing it. Leashmenu Zelacha Kirabi Yehuda, the teacher the halacha zak Rabbi Yehuda. Ve'en morin ken, but we don't paskin that way. Shekatav denehe delacha shemutar leashchiz et hasakin afilu chadada b'mashchezet shel etz. That even though it's allowed even to sharpen it, right, with a sharpener made out of wood, Rabbi Yehuda, like Rabbi Yehuda, afilu hachi. Nevertheless, he says en morin ken, but we don't pass in that way. Lechol kedei shelo yavo leashchizat b'mashchezet shel gavna. So it says because the reason why we don't tell them that it's allowed to do this. That they may come to do it right with the the actual sharpener, right? The actual sharpener, which is the stone one probably. Afilu Rabbi Yehuda modeh lefi shehu oseh kli, right? Even there, even Rabbi Yehuda admits, right, that he's making a kli over here, making utensils, and therefore it's not allowed. So in other words, it comes out that the Ran is more stringent than the Rosh over here. Because the Rosh allowed more than the Ran. So I'll tell you what the difference is, right? According to the Rosh, even using a stone sharpener is allowed, but we don't tell people. But according to the Ran, right, the stone is not allowed, right? But the wood is allowed, but we don't tell people. So it's more stringent, obviously. Okay, good. Let's go on. Mishum hachi Rabba desvira le Rabbi Yehuda. So he says, therefore, right, Rabba that holds like Rabbi Yehuda, lo hava me'avar sakina. He wasn't doing the knife, passing over the knife, right, rubbing the knife. Ela bedikula. He was only doing it with a palm tree, but not with a sharpener. Rav Yosef apuma derechaya kedita b'gimara, and Rav Yosef was doing right at the mill, as we said. Aval b'mashkezet shel lo, but not with a sharpener. Dehavale oseh kli, because you're making a kli. Ulficha katav darif. Therefore, it says the Rif, besamuch, right, close by, the dafka agav rechaya or agav dikula. Only right to do it, as we said, with a mill, or with a palm tree. Lo, but not with a sharpener. Oh no, we can't do that. And even though, right, it's possible to push out and say the Rava Rav Yosef mishum dekaime Rav Nechemia, that Rava and Rav Yosef, because right. That Rabbi Nechemia and Abaye, right, the Kamayu, were standing in front of them. Lo meshchezeh, they didn't want to sharpen b'mashchezet shel even, to use a stone one. Because since they hold that we don't pass in that way to people, we don't tell people like that, right? Lo havu matzeh lehadure lememar lehaned rabbanan tekayme kamayu. So therefore, this is the reason why they weren't able to tell these rabbis the truth about what they really were doing. Because they're doing like the rabbis. So it says, because in the Talmud, right, in the Gemara, it's apparent there, right, that according to the rabbis, right, when you're using a stone, right, sharpener, even if you're just doing it to remove the fat, asur, it's forbidden. When it says, nevertheless, it is so. But then, if there was no person there with them, right, so then they would even use a stone one. Like Rabbi Yehuda. But it says, since since we see that they only did it this way, right? So then how can we, it says, be lenient? The shmata the lekaman muched mashchezet afilu Rabbi Yehuda asur. So this is also furthermore that he says later on, right, in this lesson, right, it's going to be apparent, it's going to be learned, right, that when it comes to a sharpener, even according to Rabbi Yehuda, it's forbidden. Mishum hachi asrin le'arot sakin lechacham. So it says, therefore, we don't allow to show the knife to the rabbi, the sakin she'amda de lo paska, and he says that the knife that got dulled and didn't, right, it's not cutting well. Afilu agav duka, even if you do it right with pressure, v'chen dat harama. That's what the Rambam says. Perek daled b'Hilchot Yom Tov, laws of Yom Tov. Mashma midvarav the stam mashchezet ena ela shel even. So it says, right, that it implies in his words that usually a normal sharpener is made out of stone. So it says, but if you're using, right, a wooden one, what does that mean, wooden one? It means you're doing, right, the palm tree, right, which is wood. Right? That's what he says. Okay. So that's the language of the Rambam. That we can't use, right, we can't sharpen the knife with a normal, right, sharpener. Mechadeda al gabe etz, but you can use wood, as we said, right? Or al gabe cheres, or you can use clay, or even, or stone. But it says we don't teach this in public, right? Don't teach it. Right? In order that he shouldn't come to sharpen it with a sharpener. So, right, you can learn out deduce from here that it implies that the Rambam Savre the halacha that the Rif and the Rambam hold that halacha is krabuda like krabuda when it comes to preliminary labors, right? Right, but it says when it comes to whereas, right? When if you're talking about the skewer, right, that got chipped, whatever it is, right? Mashma de Rambam Savala Hilchata Kirabuda implies that the Rambam holds halacha zakirabuda. But tzarich lomar de'afa gav de midoraita sharei. We have to say that even from the Torah, it's allowed to do this. Although Kirabuda like Kirabuda, Kirabanan asru, but the rabbis forbade that. Lefisha en tzorech ochel nefesh, because it's not really the need. He says there's no need for this for consumption. Kolkach so much. Sharei yachol litchob bo. I'm sorry.
I apologize. So how about sharpening the knife with another knife? Like, you know how one knife and I know you use stone or
yeah, we mentioned this already a couple of times here, regarding doing that, and that was like the more lenient way because what do you call it? Because it's not the normal way.
Not okay.
So it's more the permissible way of doing things. Using one knife with another. Or as we said, right, doing it on wood. Right? Yes. Same thing, right? More or less, same thing there. So, but we'll see finally, right, in the halacha in the Shulchan Aruch, what the bottom line is, right? Because there's several opinions going on here. Okay, so yeah, a little bit confusing, but anyway, right? It seems like from what we read so far, it seems like you can do it with another knife. But the truth is, that it seems like, according to some opinions here, we don't tell people that it's allowed to do that, even that. So we have to see what the halacha is, right? Different opinions going on here. Okay, so we'll see that, right? What that is. Anyway, right, let's go on. So he says, right? So he says, if the skewer, right, got bent, as we talked about last week, right? We talked about that already. So he says it's still usable, you can still use it. What's the big deal, So put your shish kebab, a little bit curved, right? You can still put your shish kebab there, right? So what's the problem, to do it, You don't have to fix it. There's no reason to fix it. That's what he's saying, right? Okay. It says also is another thing. If you don't want to use a skewer, right? So just put it on the coal, without the skewer. You know what I mean? So not everybody uses skewers. Okay, whatever. All right, so that's the story there. I wouldn't go for that option, by the way, because it can get burnt. But whatever it is. Okay. Putting it directly on the coals, that really burns it. Anyway, with our coals, right? It's pretty, they're very strong, our coals, so it'll burn it. No question about it. Okay. So better to have something, that puts it above the coals, right? Not touching the coals. Whatever. Anyway, right? That's a practical thing. But Dat Rav Magid says Rav Magid, right? Oh, so he holds, right? This rabbi even more stringent, right? That halacha is not like Rabbi Yehuda. B'shum makshirin, right? With any preliminaries. Like it applies in this fourth chapter. Right? As we said, right, that we don't extinguish the fire in order that the pot, the dish should get burnt, should get smoked. Yesh makshin al zeh mima she'amar bepek en tzadim. So some ask a question about this, right, from a different place. It seems to contradict what we're saying over here. Halacha Rabbi Yehuda, that he says over there, halacha Rabbi Yehuda, v'tirtzu shelo kol hamakshirin shavin. So he says, but the answer is like this, right? According to this opinion, not everything is equal. In other words, there are certain things which are allowed, certain things which are not allowed. It depends on the case, blah, blah, blah. שווים, ויש הלכה בהם כרבי יהודה. So he says, there are things which halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda, ומתוך כך אסור לכבות את הבקעת. So he says, and because of this, right, they forbade to לכבות את הבקעת, to extinguish, right, the בקעת, right, we'll see what that is, מפני שהדלקה, או מפני תשמיש, because of making a fire and because of tashmish. We'll see what that means. מפני שלא תתעשן הבית, and also like you shouldn't, I see, okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. So let me read that again one more time. Yeah, so it says, ומתוך כך, because of this, he says, אסור לכבות את הבקעת מפני הדלקה. So he says, you're not allowed to extinguish, right? Or because of tashmish. So what does tashmish mean? I guess tashmish means you want to have relations with your spouse. You can't, have a fire going on there, right? It has to be dark. Or, right, because, the house shouldn't get smoked out. But it says, because, we don't want the dish to get smoked, but tavshilo and food there, that will be like preliminary. Mamash mutar, it's allowed, he says, that's only if he doesn't have a place to place it, right? To remove it from the fire. But that's Rabbeinu le'asur hakol. But he says Rabbeinu, his opinion is to forbid everything. So what does that mean? He's talking about the Rambam. Okay? The Rambam is machmir. Like the halachot, he says. Okay, so that's the Rif. All right, so in other words, this Rabbi is telling you, even more of a stringent variation over here, right? Which is that the Rambam and the Rif are really stringent here, and then they don't pass like Rabbi Yehuda. So what does that mean? They don't allow you to do preliminaries at all. That's very interesting. Okay, so I don't think the halacha is like that, but we'll see. So it says the same thing also applies regarding what we said regarding, right, the sharpening the knife. So it's according to his words, so it says according to that, right, this rabbi, the Rabbi Magid, right, he says it's a little bit difficult. Why? Then how did the Rambam allow to sharpen the knife on the palm tree, right, or on the mill, right? That should be forbidden according to that. So it's a little bit difficult, right? So he says, right, what's the answer to that? He says probably the Rav Magid holds that in this manner, right, even the rabbis admit that it's allowed. So you don't really need to pass like Rabbi Yehuda in order to allow this. Why? Because there's no labor at all. This is not really called labor. Because you're not using the normal way, right? Which is the sharpener. Right? By the way, this is an important thing to point out here, right? This point over here, which is that when you do something in an abnormal manner, okay, there's a very big advantage in halakha. And what is that? The advantage is that it's not really, you're not doing any labor, really, because the labor is only called a labor when you do it in a normal way. So therefore, right, when you're doing it abnormal, it's not a labor at all. So that's why, we're so lenient when it comes to doing things the abnormal way with a shinui, right? In many cases, right, as we see over here, right? Tons of cases like that. That's one of the reasons why. Okay, so that's the most important reason. Okay, whatever, right? Says also, he says the knife can cut a little bit, even without fixing it. So he says, therefore, it's not really included in the in the prohibition of making a kli or fixing a kli. So therefore, it's allowed according to everybody, even whether it's Rabbi Yehuda or the rabbis. Everybody allows this. That's what the Bet Yosef is answering, right? According to this opinion. Hilkach lo chilek be'ashchazat sakin ben nifgam be'yom tov ben nifgam be'erev yom tov. So it's therefore he didn't differentiate, right, whether this happened, the chip happened before Yom Tov or on Yom Tov. Doesn't really matter. Because even if it was happened before Yom Tov, you can still sharpen it with the wood, or with the with the clay, or even, or the stone. Because it's not really labor. Oh, klal at all. So because if it really was a labor, it would be forbidden if it happened even on before Yom Tov. Because we don't pass Rabbi. Klal at all, right? According to this, he says, "Had Amar Rav Chazda the sakin shenifgama machloket." That which Rav Chazda said, right, that when it comes to a knife which was chipped, it's machloket between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbanan, the rabbis. That means using the normal method, right? The normal sharpener, which is the stone one, right? That's what it's made out of. But al gabe etz or cheretz or even, right, the Rabbanan, namisharet. But he says if you're using, right, wood or clay, right, or abnormal things like that, though it's allowed even according to the rabbis. B'shipud shenirtzam dekamar. So it says regarding the the skewer, right, that also got damaged or whatever. The kamar deata machloket Rabbi Yehuda v'Rabbanan, that this is machloket between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbanan. I know b'shenikam legamer. It's only when it got totally bent out of shape. It's like tikkun gamur. So you gotta really do fix it, it's like totally bent. Hilkach have bichlal makshirin. That's the Rabbanan. So it says therefore these are like preliminaries that the rabbis forbade. The Asar Rabbi Yehuda ben Yitzhak. So it says Rabbi Yehuda forbade this when it got bent, as we said, right? The Nekam got a little bit bent. The pashit, the mafshit le even though he can even straighten it out with his hands, but but then we made a decree not to do this because you may come to also fix it when it's more severe, right? Something more severe. So he says, right, that regarding regarding shoveling out, raking out the oven, right, which we said, Rav Chazda said, it's machloket between Rav Chazda, I'm sorry, but between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbanan. The afilu haki katav Rambam Perek Gimel. Nevertheless, Rambam says in Perek Gimel she'im efshar lafot or litzlot, that if it's not possible, right, to bake or to roast, elam ken garaf, that unless you rake it out, mutar, it's allowed. Tzarich lomar shegrifat hatanur dekama Rav Chazda. So we have to say according to that raking the oven, that the Rav Chazda said, I know that be'efshar lafot bo al yedei dachak, that you can bake with it, even with difficulty, like as is. Afilu hachi yishara, nevertheless, it's allowed. The grifat tanur lav melacha gemurahi, because also, right, raking out the oven is not really a real labor, involved there. It's just exertion going on. Velo asur rabbanan ela gezerah atu shara machshirin. So the rabbis forbade that because you may come to do other preliminaries, shem melacha gemura, which are really, labor. But if it's not possible to bake unless you shovel it out, rake it out, then the rabbis didn't forbid that. They didn't decree on that. Why? Because we don't want them to refrain from doing simcha on Yom Tov, right? He wants to have his nice, right, barbecue meal, right? So why should we prevent him from doing that, right? He's enjoying the holiday. Okay, so there's still a lot more to do here, so I guess we'll continue next time, Bezat Hashem. Now I'm going to ask you again, right? Are you guys sure you wanted to do this? Because we already did it, but in other words, what I'm saying is, do you regret that we did it, or you don't regret?
No, it reminds me of my dad.
Oh, okay.
In a business he used to and he needed.
All right, it reminds you of the good old days. Okay, the good old days. Okay.
Yes.
All right, very good. So, Bezat Hashem, we'll continue next time. We have a lot more to do here. Lots of interesting stuff. Okay, so thanks for coming. Be blessed with wealth and health and happiness. Bezat Hashem. Chazak Baruch, Laila Tov. And we're coming up now to this week, Yom Yerushalayim. And then it's going to be Rosh Chodesh on Friday. And next week, B'ezrat Hashem, we have Shavuot. All right, so we're getting close to receiving the Torah, B'ezrat Hashem. God willing. Okay. Chazak Baruch. See you tomorrow.
Thank you so much, Kavod Harav.
God bless.